There are moments when nothing feels wrong, and yet something inside you is tired. Not tired in the body, not tired in the mind, tired in a deeper place. The place that has been holding itself together for longer than anyone knows. If you're here, it's likely because you've been steady for others, capable, composed, functional, and somewhere along the way, you forgot what it feels like to be held yourself, not fixed, not guided, not improved, just held. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing you need to understand, nothing you need to change. You don't need to relax. You don't need to breathe a certain way. You don't need to arrive anywhere. You are already allowed to be here. Let your body notice where it's supported. The surface beneath you, the space around you, not as a technique, but as a quiet recognition. Even now, something is carrying you. You may have learned to stay upright through effort, through vigilance, through strength. But there is another kind of strength, the strength of being met, the strength of being received, the strength of not having to prove your stability. Stillness doesn't mean emptiness. Stillness is often the first place safety returns. You might feel a subtle softening or nothing at all. Both are welcome. This space is not asking you to open. It is not asking you to trust. It is simply allowing you to rest inside yourself without collapsing and without holding. For a few moments, you don't have to be the one keeping everything in place. You don't have to manage your inner world. You don't have to stay alert. You don't have to stay strong. You are not falling behind by pausing here. You are remembering something ancient, that beneath all effort, beneath all momentum, beneath all identity, there is a quiet center that has always been holding you, and for now, you can let it. As you remain here, there is no need to move forward. Instead, allow yourself to settle downward, not physically, but inwardly, like a quiet exhale that doesn't push anything away. You may notice that your attention has been living near the surface, in thoughts, in planning, in quiet vigilance. That's not a mistake. That's how you learned to stay safe. But right now, nothing is asking you to stay alert. There is no signal to respond to, no problem waiting to be solved. So your awareness can begin to descend out of effort, out of anticipation, and into a deeper layer of presence. You don't have to guide this descent. You don't have to visualize anything. Just notice where attention naturally softens, when it no longer has to hold itself upright. Some people feel this as a gentle heaviness, others as warmth, others as a quiet spaciousness, and some feel nothing at all. All of these are signs of the same thing, a letting go of unnecessary tension. You may realize how long you've been subtly bracing, holding your breath without knowing it, holding your posture, holding your emotions in place. Not because you wanted to, but because it became familiar. Here, there is no need to brace. Nothing is about to happen. Nothing is expected of you. As the descent continues, you might notice the boundary between you and the space around you becoming less rigid, not dissolving, not disappearing, just less effortful, as if the line between inner and outer is no longer being guarded. You are still here, fully yourself, and at the same time, you are no longer carrying yourself alone. There is a kind of quiet gravity in this space, not pulling you down, but allowing you to rest, like being supported without needing to check whether the support will hold. You don't have to trust this. Trust is not required, only presence. If thoughts arise, let them pass through, like distant sounds. They don't need to be answered. They don't need to be followed. You are descending beneath the level where thoughts are needed to orient yourself into a layer that knows how to be here without commentary. This descent is not going somewhere new. It is returning to a place you've always known, but haven't needed to visit in a while. A place where effort is optional, where stillness is natural, where being held does not feel dramatic or mystical, just quietly true. And you can take your time here. Nothing is rushing you forward. As this quiet descent settles, you may begin to notice something subtle but important. A sense of ground, not the kind you create through effort, not the kind that comes from control or certainty, but an inner ground already present, already stable. You don't have to search for it. It doesn't announce itself. It simply remains, even when everything else shifts. This inner ground is not an idea. It's not a belief. It's not something you convince yourself of. It's the feeling of being supported from the inside out. You may notice that your body knows this ground before your mind does. A sense of weight settling naturally. A quiet steadiness beneath movement. A feeling of being seated within yourself. There is no need to adjust your posture. No need to straighten or relax. Your body already knows how to rest when it feels held. This ground does not require vigilance. It does not need monitoring. It does not disappear when you stop paying attention. It is not fragile. Many people spend years trying to build stability through habits, through discipline, through constant self-regulation. But this ground has never needed to be built. It has always been here. What changes is not its presence, but your relationship to it. When effort softens, when pressure eases, when you stop bracing for what might come next, this ground becomes noticeable, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just quietly dependable. You may realize that you've been living slightly above this ground, hovering in readiness, hovering in preparation, and that hovering takes energy. Here, there is no need to hover. You are allowed to land. Landing does not mean stopping your life. It does not mean withdrawing. It simply means letting your center rest where it naturally belongs. Within this ground, nothing is demanding explanation. You don't need to understand what's happening. You don't need to label it. This is not a state to achieve or a feeling to maintain. It is a recognition that beneath your thoughts, beneath your roles, beneath your history, there is a steady presence that has been carrying you all along. You are not holding this ground. This ground is holding you, and you don't have to stay here deliberately. It will remain, whether you notice it or not. For now, you can simply rest into the knowing that you are supported without effort. As you rest with this inner ground, there may be a subtle shift, not a change you make, but a change you allow. A recognition that you are not just grounded, you are being held. Being held does not mean being constrained. It does not mean being watched or managed. It means there is a quiet containment that does not require your participation. You don't have to maintain it. You don't have to protect it. You don't have to keep yourself composed. There is something deeply relieving about not having to hold yourself together. You may notice how often you subtly do that, keeping your emotions balanced, your thoughts reasonable, your inner world organized. That effort may have felt necessary, but here, nothing is asking you to stay organized. Nothing is asking you to stay strong. Being held feels different for everyone. For some, it feels like warmth around the chest. For others, a gentle pressure around the back or shoulders. For others, simply the absence of tension. And for some, it feels like nothing in particular, just a sense that nothing is wrong. All of these are expressions of the same thing. a release from self-containment. You may notice that when you stop holding yourself, nothing falls apart. Your breath continues. Your body remains stable. Your awareness stays present. Nothing collapses. That realization alone can be deeply settling. You are allowed to be unguarded here, not because you've earned it, not because conditions are perfect, but because being held does not depend on circumstances. It depends on presence, and presence is already here. You don't have to trust this experience. Trust is an action. This is simply something you are noticing. If the mind tries to analyze, let it pass. If emotions arise, let them move gently. Nothing needs to be contained by you. You are already contained. Being held does not make you passive. It makes you available. Available to rest, available to soften, available to stop monitoring yourself. For a moment, you can let go of the role of inner manager. You don't have to watch over your experience. You don't have to regulate it. You are not responsible for holding yourself right now. You are allowed to be held quietly, naturally, without effort, and nothing is required in return. As the experience of being held settles, you may begin to notice something else emerging. Not excitement, not relief, but a quiet sense of safety. Not the kind that comes from reassurance or certainty, the kind that exists when nothing inside you is on alert. Quiet safety doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, "You're safe now." It simply removes the feeling that something needs to be watched. You may notice your nervous system doing less scanning, less anticipating, less bracing. This isn't because everything in life is resolved. It's because, in this moment, nothing is threatening your presence. You are not being asked to prepare. You are not being asked to respond. You are not being asked to stay ahead of anything. Quiet safety allows the body to rest without collapsing, the mind to slow without becoming dull, awareness to remain open without being vigilant. This kind of safety is subtle. It doesn't come with a story. It doesn't depend on circumstances improving. It exists beneath conditions. You may notice that when quiet safety is present, your breath becomes less noticeable, not deeper, not slower, just less managed. You don't have to guide it. You don't have to observe it. It knows how to regulate itself when it's no longer under supervision. The same is true for your inner world. Thoughts may still arise, feelings may still move, but they do so within a wider space that doesn't tighten around them. Nothing needs to be fixed. Nothing needs to be resolved. Quiet safety is not the absence of difficulty. It is the absence of inner urgency. You may realize how much urgency you carry without noticing. The need to stay functional, the need to stay composed, the need to stay ahead. Here, urgency has no role. Nothing is late. Nothing is falling behind. Nothing requires your immediate attention. You are allowed to be exactly where you are, without preparing for what comes next. Quiet safety does not ask you to stay here. It does not cling. It simply allows you to rest until you naturally move again. And even when you do move, this safety does not disappear. It remains in the background, steady, unchanging, unconcerned with performance. For now, you can let yourself notice what it feels like to not be internally rushed, to not be internally watched, to not be internally corrected. This is not something you have to protect. It protects itself, and you are already within it. Within this quiet safety, you may begin to sense something subtle shifting, not toward intensity, not toward emotion, but toward presence. A soft presence, not something arriving from outside you, not something you summon or create. simply the feeling of not being alone inside your own experience. Soft presence doesn't speak, it doesn't guide, it doesn't instruct, it simply remains. You may notice that when this presence is felt, there is less need to narrate what's happening, less need to check in with yourself, less need to confirm that you're doing this right. You're not being observed, you're being accompanied. That distinction matters. Being observed keeps the system alert. Being accompanied allows it to settle. Soft presence has no agenda. It doesn't want you to feel better. It doesn't want you to change. It isn't waiting for progress. It is content to be here exactly as you are. You may notice that when presence is soft, attention spreads naturally, not focusing, not drifting, just resting. Like awareness no longer needs to stand upright to remain awake. This kind of presence doesn't require effort. In fact, effort obscures it. The more you try to be present, the more distance you create. Here, presence reveals itself when effort steps aside. You might notice moments of quiet clarity, not insight, not understanding, just a simple sense of being here. That's enough. You don't need to deepen it. You don't need to sustain it. Soft presence doesn't need to be held in place. It stays when it's not interfered with. You may notice how often you subtly interfere, checking, adjusting, anticipating, not because something is wrong, but because you learn to manage yourself. Here, management is unnecessary. You are not a problem to solve. You are not a state to maintain. You are not an experience to optimize. You are simply present, and presence is already complete. Soft presence allows experience to move at its own pace. Thoughts can arise and pass without pulling you with them. Sensations can shift without demanding interpretation. You remain quietly aware without effort. This is not detachment. It is intimacy without tension, a closeness that doesn't grip, a companionship that doesn't intrude. You are not alone here, and nothing is being asked of you. There is nothing you need to take from this moment, nothing to remember, nothing to apply later, nothing to carry forward as an idea. What matters here is not what stays in your mind, but what is allowed to remain without supervision. Remain does not mean holding on. It means not interrupting what is already here. Soft presence does not need to be sustained. Quiet safety does not need to be revisited. Being held does not need to be confirmed. They remain on their own. When you stop checking, you may notice a natural inclination to see if something has changed, to ask whether this experience is working, to measure its depth. That impulse is familiar. It comes from a lifetime of managing inner experience. Here, you don't have to do that. Nothing needs to be evaluated. Nothing needs to be improved. Remain simply means allowing. What is stable? To stay unnoticed, like a background hum that doesn't require attention to exist. You don't have to stay focused. You don't have to keep your awareness anchored. If attention drifts, that's fine. If thoughts arise, that's fine. If sensations change, that's fine. Nothing about this state is fragile. You are not responsible for keeping it intact. In fact, the more you leave it alone, the more naturally it remains. This is not a practice. It is a permission to stop managing your inner world for a few moments longer. You don't have to sink deeper. You don't have to feel more. You don't have to stay still. Remain means allowing yourself to be exactly as you are, without adjusting. Even the impulse to leave can be held here. You are not being asked to stay. You are simply allowed to. And when you do eventually move on, When attention shifts, when the body moves, when the day continues, nothing essential is lost. Being held does not end when you stop noticing it. Quiet safety does not disappear when you turn outward. Soft presence does not withdraw. When life resumes, it remains beneath movement, beneath thought, beneath effort. You can return to it without effort, not by remembering these words, but by letting go of the habit of holding yourself together. For now, there is nothing more to say, nothing more to guide, nothing more to deepen. You can simply remain for as long as feels natural. And when you're ready to move, move gently. You are still held.